Hello, and I think we're live. Although YouTube seems to be saying that the quality is not good. So is this coming through okay? Hopefully you can hear me and see me. I'm not quite sure what the delay is on this at any time. Yeah, okay, good. Good. Okay, so trying to do. Right, okay, so a lot of white. Oh, the shirt. It's actually kind of a slight pink color, but it shows up as white, I think, on this camera. But anyway, okay. So thank you everybody for tuning in, and so this is the I think fifth episode of Cryptocurrency Explained, and the kind of topic for this evening is the XRP Ledger Consensus Protocol and proof of work, or versus proof of work. So I'm going to try and give a kind of very kind of quick, hopefully understandable explanation of the two of them and how they work, what they're needed for, what the purpose of these particular approaches are, and what the problem is they're trying to solve and how they go about doing it. Now, this actually came about from I was on holiday, and I had this sudden sort of thought about how to explain the XRP Ledger Consensus Protocol, and hopefully this should make some sense to some people. And I then, thinking it through a bit further, realized that I could actually extend the analogy to actually talk about and contrast the approach with proof of work as well. So we'll see how that goes. But first of all, just rewinding slightly, the consensus protocol and proof of work, just to recap what the point of them is, what the problem is we're trying to solve. So we're talking about cryptocurrencies, we're talking about virtual currencies, we're talking about digital money. Now, one of the big main fundamental problems with digital money versus coins and banknotes and lumps of gold or whatever, is that it is easy to copy digital information, harder than it is to copy or replicate physical money. So if I have a lump of gold, I can't just suddenly clone that lump of gold from one lump of gold into two. If I take that lump of gold and I give it to somebody else, I no longer have that lump of gold. Whereas with a digital asset, with virtual currencies, there needs to be some mechanism that says, if I send you this information, I can't send that same information to somebody else and it still be a payment. I can't double spend. Alice can't send 10 XRP or 10 Bitcoin or 10 Ethereum or whatever to Bob and also send the same 10 to Charlie. Right? We have to have a way of stopping you doing that. Otherwise, the whole system breaks down. And Tom's asked whether I can talk about Ethereum and the idea of proof of stake. So Ethereum uses proof of work at the moment, although they are looking to move to proof of stake. Proof of stake is another approach. I probably won't talk about it too much in this because I haven't thought through how it would fit the analogy that I've come up with. But we might be able to talk about it and get there. We'll see how it goes. But Ethereum at the moment uses proof of work the same as Bitcoin. So these approaches are to try and stop this double spend problem. That is the main thing that we're trying to solve. And when Bitcoin came out, the big revolutionary thing with Bitcoin was that it was the first kind of application of solving the double spend problem without needing any kind of central authority. So again, to recap, if you've got, say, a bank and they've got a database in that bank and that keeps track of everybody's account and how much is in each account, if I go to one shop and I spend £10, that is deducted from my account, from the database. There's a connection that goes back to my bank. It deducts £10. If I then go into another shop, I can't spend that same £10. If I only had £10 in my account and I've spent it once, I've now got nothing left in my account. I can't spend it again. Now that relies on there being one central point, one truth as to how much money I have in my account. Now, Bitcoin was revolutionary in that it was able to solve this problem without a single point. So that means you don't have a single entity to trust. At the moment, if my bank suddenly turns around and says, nope, you've got no money, because of a glitch, there's nothing really I can do about that. They are the truth, and if they say that I've got no money, then I've got no money. And so the idea is that Bitcoin was a way in which one person could send somebody else some value, some money, digital money, without needing a bank or any kind of central authority to act as the arbiter and to make sure that that double spend doesn't happen. Now, if there was a central database, this would be easy. But because there isn't a central database, the whole point of these cryptocurrencies is there's no central authority. There's no one point of failure that could be stopped, coerced, censored, interfered with. Means you can't do it that way. So you need to find another way of doing it. So here's the analogy. Here's where we're going to try and go with this. Now, I'm going to try and explain this for XRP first. Then I will explain it for proof of work for Bitcoin. Okay? Because I think the analogy probably works slightly stronger with XRP, but we'll do it with both to compare and contrast. So, XRP Consensus Protocol, XRP Ledger Consensus Protocol. In both of these cases, if you can reduce the problem down to which transaction comes first, then you know that the second transaction must be invalid. So if I spend £10 to one person, I can't then spend that same £10 to a second person. And if we know that the first one came first, and if everybody agrees that, then we can agree that the second one is invalid because I've already spent that. So we can reduce the problem down to a way of ordering the transactions. And if we can all agree on the order, then this becomes easy. Now that bit was kind of the bit that David Schwartz and others came out with in XRP, was this revolution that if we can reduce this down to an ordering problem, then it becomes a lot easier, right? So how do we do this? So with XRP and the ledger, there are a number of nodes on the network. So there's roughly about 1,000 nodes on the network at the moment. Each one of those nodes is a server, is a computer running software, the what's called Ripple D software, that has a copy of the ledger. So if we imagine a large room, a large hall, if you've taken exams at school, think of the gym, the sports hall that you all sat in to take your exams, and everybody had a little desk, and everybody sat there, in rows, and you all sat there and you did your exam, and you weren't sort of talking to each other, but you each had a desk, you each had a book, and you each kind of wrote your answers in the exam. So imagine we've got this hall, we've got these 1,000 nodes. Each one of those nodes is a desk, is a person at the desk. They're not a student. Let's say they're an accountant, a clerk, a registrar. They are a civil servant, whatever you want to say. They are there with a ledger, a book, and they are writing down transactions. And what we want is every one of those 1,000 nodes to write down the same transactions in the same order, so that if we ask any one of them, they would give us the same answer and there would be no dispute. And also, if any one of them was compromised, we could compare it to the others and go, well, 99 of them say this, and that one says something else. So we can be fairly sure that that one, that says something else is the one that's been compromised, right? So again, if we further reduce the problem down to what we want to do is we want to get all of them to write down either A or B, right? A is one set of transactions, B is another set of transactions. We want them to all agree. So they're all sitting there, these 1,000 clerks, and of that 1,000, there is a smaller subset of what are called on the XRP ledger are called validators. Now, of that 1,000 nodes, there are can't remember at the moment, maybe about 200 validators on the network, something like that. Now, the only difference between those validators and the other 800 nodes on the network is that they shout out their answer, what they believe the answer to the question to be, either A or B. So 1,000 clerks are there, pencils in hand, pens in hand, ready to write down the answer, what they think the answer is. But they can also hear that there are 200 people in this room who are shouting out their answers. So we have the first round. And those 200, the majority of them say shout out A. A few of them say B, but the majority of them shout out A. Now, you can't really listen to 200. So imagine that you could listen to just 10 out of that 200, right? So of that 200, you pick 10, and imagine you can just sort of zoom your hearing in to just hear those 10, right? And sort of filter out the other 200 that are talking, but you can just hear those 10. And so you hear them all say A. You might hear a B, but you know, think about when somebody shouts out an audience answer in an audience in a show or something like that, and you hear everybody, you know, A, B, A. You can kind of get a feeling for, well, the answer's probably A, because the majority of people are saying A, right? Now you've chosen which of those 10 you're going to listen to. Now they don't know who's listening to them, and it could be any one of the 200. You could select that 10 out of any one of the 200. So, but you're listening to them, and you hear that the majority of them say A. So, okay, fair enough. The answer is A. Maybe if you're not quite sure, you do another round, and think about what happens when, you know, everybody's asked a question in a talk. You know, everybody put their hands up. Who's whatever, and people kind of look around and, well, do I maybe? Yes, no, maybe. Okay, if everybody else is putting their hand up, then I'll put my hand up too, right? Similar kind of thing. So we do a second round, and those that were a bit unsure who said B, well, they've heard everybody else say A as well, so they say A. So the next round, everybody said A, so we can say, okay, well, the answer is definitely A. And so all of those 1,000 clerks write down A in the ledger, and that's the answer. We go on to the next round, the next one, and everybody maybe says B, or there's a majority that say B. Again, there's a few dissenters, but you can hear that the majority is saying B. Now, if one of those 200 nodes decides to be malicious or evil, what exactly could they do? You know, they could say C, you know, or they could say A, B, A, B, A, and confuse people. But after a while, you'd realise that, well, let's ignore them, because everybody else is saying A, they're saying C. Well, C isn't even a valid answer anyway, so we can ignore that. And you can quite easily come to a conclusion as to who is, you know, who are the right, what the right answer is based upon this consensus, this majority. Now, somebody could say, well, what if a whole bunch of protesters come in and they start saying random things to disrupt things? Well, that doesn't really matter, because you've chosen your 10 people you're going to listen to. So it doesn't matter what they say. It doesn't matter if 100,000 people come in and start saying random answers, because you're only listening to those 10 that you've chosen. And like I said, if those 10, if you notice one of them is continually saying the wrong thing compared to the others, saying something different, well, you can guess, well, maybe they're not to be trusted. So we're going to ignore them. We'll listen to just this 9. Or maybe we'll pick another 10th and we'll put them in, see how they do. So that's how you can come to the consensus. That's what the XRP Consensus Protocol does. That's how it comes to the conclusion. Then at the end of each page, when each of those 1,000 clerks have written down the transaction, at the end of each page, they sign the page, right? And they turn it over. And so you know that page has been validated, and that is correct. Now, in digital ledgers, what they actually do is they take the signature of that page and they include it in the next page, so that you get this chain. And that's the blockchain. That is, each page is a block. Each ledger in XRP terms, block in Bitcoin terms, has a series of transactions. A signature, a digital signature, is made of all of those transactions, such that if any transaction changed, the signature would change. And you include that signature in the next page so that you have this chain of record, so that you can be sure that no transaction could be changed. Because if any transaction would change, the signature would change, which would validate the next transaction, now validate the next block, the next block, the next block, and you would easily see, right? And you've got 1,000 ones to look at, so you'd easily tell if one of them has been compromised, and you can kind of go back through and validate it. Hopefully that makes some sense. Okay, that's the XRP Consensus Protocol approach for coming up with consensus on which order the transactions happen in. Do they happen in order A or order B? Right? A and B are a set of transactions and ordering in which they happen. So, you know, when we said A or B, what we're actually saying is A is this set of transactions in this order, and B is in this slightly different order. And so that's what we were trying to agree on. And like I said, if we can all agree on one order, then we can all say, well, the first transaction that goes through uses up all the available balance, so the second transaction can't go through because the balance has already been spent, right? That's XRP Ledger Consensus Protocol. Let's try and compare this with proof of work, with Bitcoin and Ethereum and how they work. We have the same haul. We have the same, let's keep it simple, 1,000 nodes in the clerks, all with the same book, writing down transactions. Instead of having a few of them kind of shouting out their answers and trying to come to an agreement on that, which is what XRP does, proof of work does it differently, in that effectively they pick, simplifying slightly, but as a way of explaining this, they pick one node, and that node chooses the answer. And so we pick one node and we say, that node says A. So everybody writes down A. Right? Next time that node says B, everybody writes down B. That's great. But what if that node, knowing that they are the one that makes the decisions, they then start acting maliciously and evilly and causing problems? So you want to not just have one node, but you want to have, maybe move it. And so in Bitcoin terms, every 10 minutes, a new block is created. And that block, the transactions that are put in that block are agreed by that node. In Bitcoin terms, it's what's called a miner. And so how do they pick that one? So what they do, you may have seen reference to the proof of work algorithm, this puzzle, this mathematical puzzle. This is the reason why Bitcoin needs so much energy, because it's solving this puzzle. And I've come up with a good way of explaining that. You're familiar with Sudoku? It's a puzzle. Sudoku is a puzzle, and you have to fill in the squares. And Sudoku, here we go. Here's an image of the puzzle. So there's a number of squares there, and you've got to fill in and come to the same number in each square. So you've got to put a number here that means that both 8, 9, and that number adds up to 5, 6, and it's the same number there that you get total in each direction. And then the larger square also does the same. So, it's a puzzle. It takes a little while, right? It takes some effort to do. You could sit down with a pencil and work through it. So imagine that what happens is all of those 1,000 clerks get given a Sudoku puzzle. And what they do is they each try to complete the puzzle. And the first one to complete it is the one that gets to choose the order in which the transactions happen in, or which transactions appear in that block, in that ledger. So it's timed such it takes about 10 minutes. And if it's too easy, then they make it a bit harder. They make the Sudoku board a bit bigger, in effect, to make it take a little bit longer, so that on average it always takes on average about 10 minutes. Sometimes it'll be a bit quicker because they'll find it quicker. So it might take 5 minutes or it might take 15 minutes. But on average it'll try to be about 10 minutes. So, but it's very easy with Sudoku. Although it's difficult to fill the puzzle in, it's very easy to validate it. It's very easy to look at that puzzle and go, add up the numbers, yep, that's correct, yep, that's correct, that's correct, that's correct, done, right? So it's very simple to check it. It's hard to complete it in the first place. And that's what the proof of work algorithm effectively does. It's this puzzle that everybody tries to compete in order to then effectively create the block. And the idea being is that it's because it takes some effort, it is harder to replay that, and you need the same effort again to replay that if you wanted to make a change. Going slightly off the analogy a bit, but it is possible with Bitcoin that a series of blocks are not necessarily confirmed as final at the time, and it might be that another view of the set of blocks becomes the final one, and then they all agree on that. So there's a chance that somebody can go back for a period of time and slightly rewrite sort of history. So that's the approach. And Tom's mentioned about you can actually mine by hand, and yes, the actual algorithm that Bitcoin uses is actually really simple. Okay, it's quite a simple hash algorithm, but the complexity of it has been increased, that now you've got computers that are solving this, millions, billions, trillions of times a second, solving this looking for the right answer. And the analogy with that is that we're sat in this hall, everybody's filling in the Sudoku puzzle. But some people have the ability to say, buy a calculator. And they buy a calculator. And that calculator means they can actually do the Sudoku puzzle quicker. Maybe it's a special Sudoku calendar. The sums in Sudoku aren't that hard, but just imagine that having a calculator means you can do it quicker. Some people maybe buy a more expensive calculator, or a better calculator, or a faster calculator. Now that faster calculator means that they can answer the puzzle faster. So if they answer the puzzle faster, they will be the one to order the blocks, or choose which transactions go in that block more often. And what actually happens in Bitcoin is they get a reward for that. That's the mining reward at the moment that they get. That's not going to continue indefinitely with Bitcoin, but they get a reward. So there's an incentive for them to do it faster, and that is why you now have, the Bitcoin mines. You see these big Bitcoin mining operations in which you have, rooms and rooms and rooms, racks and racks and racks full of processors, solving this. This is what these Bitcoin mining, this is why they need so much power. If you look at these things, it's huge, the operations going on. So that's why it needs so much power. That's why it costs so much, and that's why they then kind of end up being centralized in places where there's cheap power, which is kind of one of the downsides of proof of work, in my mind, because it leads towards centralization because there's the economies of scale, and with XRP there isn't the incentive for those economies of scale. Buying a faster calculator doesn't make any difference. You can't go any faster. It's just trying to get to an agreement, and if you don't come to an agreement, somebody will just, if you start being malicious, somebody will just stop listening to you. So there's no incentive to game the system with the XRP Consensus Protocol. So there's no incentive. Tom's just asked, there's no incentive for the Consensus Protocol. So why do people do it? Well, the reason why people run validators on the XRP Ledger is for the good of the network. It's slightly altruistic, but there is a benefit to it, in that if you are, say, an exchange, well, it is in your best interest that people can actively transact with XRP. So by running a validator, you are helping that ecosystem to be resilient. So it's slightly more altruistic, I would say. It's people running it for the benefit of what they are trying to do, rather than just trying to sort of rent seek and get money off of the network for doing it. You don't get money just by running an XRP validator node. The only way you benefit from it is if you have some use case that ultimately benefits from XRP being stable. So maybe you run a business. I run my own node because I transact with XRP, I trade with XRP, I write algorithmic trading software that trades on the XRP Ledger. I need the XRP Ledger to work, so I run a validator node, and similar to other people as well that run them on the network. So hopefully that has explained what's going on with it. Tom's asked another question. What if all the Bitcoin is mined? Okay, so there's a maximum of 21 million Bitcoin that could theoretically ever exist, mathematically, based upon the algorithm and the rules of the system. And every so often, the difficulty gets harder and harder. So the amount of Bitcoin mined, it's kind of this sort of curve that will start to level off as the difficulty gets harder and harder, and the reward gets less. As it goes on, the reward gets less. So when all the Bitcoin is mined, there will be no mining fee. There'll be no reward for mining. So the miners will get their fee from the fees that are paid to do a Bitcoin transaction. So if I send you some Bitcoin, I have to pay a fee, and that fee also goes to the miners as well. How's this going to work when the transaction fee, when the mining sort of subsidy is no longer there? Good question. My personal view is I think it's going to be very hard for them to keep the network secure, because I think the incentive for mining will diminish to a point where it won't be as economical for people to run it. But then maybe they'll do something else instead. I don't know. Will the fees have to go up to compensate for that? It might be that the transaction fees increase in order to compensate. It's all a bit crystal ball stuff. There are as many theories that go one way as the other way. Bitcoin maximalists will say that no, it'll be fine for this reason, that reason. And they've got, in some cases, some valid reasons. I don't personally. I haven't heard one yet that I can believe in sort of going forward. XRP, on the other hand, doesn't have this mining thing. There's no incentives, but on the converse of that, there's no way to distribute the currency. So with Bitcoin, the Bitcoin is distributed by mining. So the Bitcoin that is not yet in circulation will appear in circulation in proportion to those that are mining it. So those that are doing the most mining will get the most Bitcoin. With XRP, there's a whole bunch that was given to Ripple, the company, so they have 60 billion XRP, and that is slowly trickling out into the marketplace. They have most of it in escrow. That is slowly trickling out to the marketplace. Some people say, well, that's not fair that one company has so much of it. They have control over the value of the currency by virtue of having so much of it. They can manipulate the price. Most arguments against that kind of go, well, why would they want to harm the price? Because they're the biggest holder of it. They're the biggest stakeholder. Why would they shoot themselves in the foot? So, yeah, there's kind of pros and cons to both approaches. On the Bitcoin side, with proof of work, because of the economies of scale of the mining, that what it actually means is that the most Bitcoin being mined goes to the people that already probably have the most wealth anyway, because they've got the big mining rigs and the operations to do the mining. So again, it's probably, in my mind, going to lead to more centralization, that the bigger the mining operation, the more Bitcoin they can generate, so the bigger they'll get, so the more Bitcoin they can generate, so the bigger they'll get. And if you look at a graph over time, sort of a pie chart as to who has the sort of greatest hash rate, the greatest speed of solving the proof of work algorithm, it's becoming a fewer players with a larger hash rate. So it's becoming more and more centralized. So BladeME asks, what about the UNL? Should I change the default list? Well, the validators list is random. How do we choose the validators? So on the XRP Ledger, on the Consensus Protocol, there's the unique node list. Now, the unique node list is the name for say, in my example, the 10 out of the 200 validators that you choose to listen to. Now, Ripple, the company, publish a default unique node list as to who they think are reliable operators of validators, right? Now, we don't have to trust each individual validator. We just have to trust that they're not all operated by the same person and going to collude together. If we chose 10 and those 10 all say, hey, look, you 5 say A, this 5 will say B, that'll confuse them. They'll never get an answer. The network will never, it will be so confused it will just stop. So if you ensure that the 10 on that list are unlikely to collude with each other, then you're okay. It doesn't mean you have to trust each individual one, because again, each individual one can be malicious as long as they are not colluding with others. So Ripple have this unique node list that they publish that includes a number of nodes, and I think it's about 21 nodes at the moment, of which a certain number are operated by Ripple and a certain number are elsewhere. So XRP, what was it? XRP node list app. I can't remember the name of the SYN. Somebody will remember the name of it. SYN app. No. Validator app. What was it? Validator XRP app. Oh, sod's law, I can't find it. Oh, there we go. Minvalist. I knew it had a SYN in it, so you had a double N. So this is a validator list created by somebody. Hopefully it loads. Yes, here we go. So at the moment, so it's 136 validators. I said 200. I was kind of close. The default unique node list that Ripple publish has 21 on, and of that, 52% are not run by Ripple, 48% are run by Ripple. So that node list, I think if I click on here, details, here we go. This is a list of nodes. I think there's I think BitHomp's a new one that's just been added in there. Fantastic. I didn't realize that's, I think that's a new one that's just been added in there, which is great. But a number of these are exchanges. Some of these are individual people. So Rabbit Kickplug, that's run by Rabbit on Twitter on the XRP list. The XRP Tipbot, Vitsa Wind, who runs the XRP Tipbot. So some of these are run by Ripple, but the majority are actually run by independent parties. So the question is, can that list be random? Well, if out of the 136 or whatever it was, you just picked a random lot and everybody picked a random lot, then no, that would not work, because you need to have a certain minimal overlap between everybody's unique node list in order to come up with the same answer. Because if you didn't, imagine if in my example, I pick 10 clerks that I'm listening to and you pick a totally different 10 clerks. Well, all of my 10 clerks could have happened to say A and all of yours could have happened to say B. And then we've got two different answers. And effectively, we forked the network and we've got effectively two different ledgers then. So what we need is everybody to listen to a set of ledgers in which there's a set of validators in which there's an overlap between them. Now, that overlap at the moment, I think it needs to be about, I can't remember if it's about 80%, 60%, something like that, the overlap it needs to be. And Ripple are working on the next version of their, or will be working on at some point, the next version of their consensus algorithm, a thing called Cobalt, and that has a lower requirement for overlap between them. So still, having them random would still not work. There still needs to be some overlap between them. And you'd say, so how do you choose the validators? Well, like I said, Ripple have their default list. If that were to go away, anybody could look here and say, okay, well, we'll just pick all the ones that are not Ripple then, and kind of come to an agreement. There would need to be some human intervention. There would need to be some agreement on those, on the order of those, which some people may say is a weakness, but actually in all distributed systems, the system will do what the majority of the users want. So what would happen is it would be a case of the majority of users would get together and say, okay, Ripple has vanished off the face of the earth. Who are we now going to choose as default list? Someone will say, okay, we'll choose this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, etc. And that's then what everybody uses. Now there's also, there is a statistics for the validators that show how much in agreement they are. So you'd be able to tell which ones would be reliable ones to pick. So on this validator list here, validator registry, we have an agreement. So if it's 1, that means they've agreed on everything. If we scroll right the way down, there's ones with 0 here. That means they've not agreed on anything. So I don't know what they're doing. oh well, some of these are okay. Some of these are Ripple's test networks, so they're not going to agree with the production one. But there's some here, as you can see. I mean, there's some here that have agreed with, a mere 20-25% of the validation. So you wouldn't listen to them because they don't seem very reliable. So you would agree and pick a bunch up here. And as you see, most of the ones that were on that list are kind of sort of showing up here, sort of towards the top. So at least within the 1 to 0.99 or so. Yeah, I mean even bit 0.999. So that's pretty close there. Okay, so hopefully that answers that in terms of how that's chosen. So it is a slightly manual process. What if you do what on purpose, Tom? What if you choose to, disrupt the list or something? Or if you choose to disagree, if you choose to listen to the wrong ones? If you choose to listen to the wrong ones, then the chances are you will end up effectively with a different view of the ledger. So you might have transactions on there that don't agree with transactions on the rest of the network. And you would have what, in sort of Bitcoin terms, they would call a hard fork. In effect, you have chosen a set of parameters different to the set of parameters the rest of the network are using. And as a result, you would end up with something different. And there was a really good, I should have tried to find it ahead of this actually, there was a really good visualization. The guy who wrote one of the wallets, name escapes me right this exact moment, lives in New Zealand, wrote Toast Wallet. Well, he wrote a really good little visualization that showed each kind of set of ledgers as a little graphic, and like a graphical checksum, and you could see a number of different servers and who was agreeing with who, and it was quite a good way of seeing. And he actually had to play around and saw, okay, what if I only agree with this number of them, or choose this one or this one, and to try and work out where that sort of threshold would be, which was quite interesting, trying to work out at what point it would break and what point it would not break. For the moment, most people just agree with the list that Ripple publish. Some people say that's centralization and that we're trusting Ripple. Well, we're only trusting them to publish a list, and we can all agree on the list. If we decide that Ripple aren't a good custodian of that list, well, we choose somebody else to publish that list. All it is a list that we agree on. So, what if Bitcoin changed totally its consensus protocol? Do you think it's possible? Well, potentially, yes. So Bitcoin could change, well, maybe not its consensus protocol, but it could change the algorithm that's used for proof of work. And this has been, considered, because people have said that these currency mining farms use specialized hardware, ASICs, that are specialized chips designed exactly to solve the problem that Bitcoin's proof of work uses. And if there was a problem, they could potentially change Bitcoin to then use a different algorithm that would then effectively invalidate all of that hardware because it would no longer work with it, which is kind of the equivalent of, when you hear a country's bank suddenly say, we are changing all of the £20 banknotes overnight, and they're now this new one. I think they did it in Russia a while back or something. In certain countries they changed the banknotes all in one night to try and get rid of money laundering and say, okay, well, all of those banknotes are now invalid, we have new ones. It would be the equivalent of doing that. And it would bring around a lot of other problems as well. In terms of changing the actual full consensus protocol within Bitcoin, well, Ethereum, as Tom asked at the start, Ethereum are trying to do that same thing. So they are moving from proof of work to what's called proof of stake, and a new protocol, Casper, I think the name of it is, that they're using, which is their proof of stake protocol. Now, proof of stake, instead of having the highest CPU capacity, proof of stake effectively, you are saying you have the largest amount of the currency in effect, and you're basically putting some currency forward. You are staking it in the protocol, and that's what it's based on. So Ethereum are trying to do that, but they have been trying to do it for a number of years and have not got that far yet, and there has been some, grumblings in the Ethereum community that this should have happened a while ago, because proof of stake in theory is more is less processor intensive than proof of work, because you don't need the CPU power. So in theory, uses less electricity, less power to run. So in theory, is more ecological. Would be easier to move. If you couldn't just suddenly pick up a Bitcoin mining operation and move it, because you've got physical racks of equipment. You've got vast amounts of power requirements. You can't just rock up in a business park and set it up, because you're going to need a dedicated power feed in order to feed it. Most Bitcoin mining operations are near hydroelectric power or decommissioned coal power stations in China that are no longer legally able to operate on the main electrical grid because they're not clean enough. So rather than being completely mothballed, some entrepreneurs have set up Bitcoin mining operations and said, well, we don't need you to connect to the rest of the grid. We're just going to connect you to our Bitcoin mining operation and run from there. But again, it leads on to a load of secondary effects. Well, if I can somehow get cheap power, maybe not officially, but if there's that cable there that I could tap into and use that, well, hey, I can get some free mining operations. So there's then a nefarious side of a less than legal side of things that could evolve from that, in that if I can steal power, I can generate money, and that then starts to become an issue. And also, you turn up in some small town and use up all their power, then the residential power goes up and the residents get annoyed. So yeah. So Bland Ami asks, what is the major drawback of the Ripple Consensus Protocol? Well, the main thing that it doesn't have that proof of work has is a distribution mechanism. So the main drawback is that they're not using the consensus protocol to also distribute the coins. So with Bitcoin, the Bitcoins are given out as part of that. Now, as I said, in reality, I don't think actually that's that much of a deal, because it actually ends up going to the people that have the most power anyway. Within XRP, we've kind of just skipped that step and said, okay, well, there's one company that holds a load of it, and we know where they are. That's fine. We trust them. They've got a stake in the ecosystem. They are a company, with private investors and venture capital funding, and if they suddenly decide to burn all that XRP or blow it up or devalue it or do whatever, then they have to answer to shareholders that could take them to court for devaluing the investment that they have made in the company, because the company happens to hold so much of that asset. So I don't really see a major drawback. Like I said, there's some things that need to be aware of, like who the validators, which validators we pick, and ensure that we have a consistent set and that we don't just go and randomly pick validators. But that's not a particularly big problem. It just needs a bit of coordination. But the same thing happens in most other systems. You need some coordination, that you say, we are all going to agree on these parameters of the network. And if we don't, then we've got a different network. The only difference really between Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash, when Bitcoin Cash forked off, was they had chosen to have different parameters, a different block size. And so that's what, sort of changed it. So if you pick the same parameters, then you're fine. There are a lot more consensus algorithms. Is the CP the best in your opinion? So is the XRP Ledger Consensus Protocol the best consensus algorithm protocol? I don't know. There was a recent mathematical sort of study that Ripple released of it, in which they found it wasn't quite as good as they originally thought in certain circumstances. So the amount of overlap required was greater than what they originally expected. They have also come out with, like I said, they've devised a new consensus protocol called Cobalt that they will be working on in the future, maybe next year, and that works better under certain circumstances in the XRP Ledger consensus protocol. So rather than sort of 3 or 4 seconds per ledger, it will be down to 1 second. So that means ledgers go faster, transactions go faster. I mean, hey, 3 or 4 seconds is no slouch, but obviously 1 second is 3 or 4 times faster. So that's got to be better in that regard. And if there is a disagreement, then the network's able to continue on a bit further than the consensus protocol does. Stellar Lumens XLM network, that was a fork of the Ripple D code base, and the main thing they changed was the consensus protocol. However, they then had an issue in which they did end up forking the network accidentally and had to then rewrite it, scrap it and rewrite it, as far as I'm aware, to work differently. And in the end, they basically, from what I gather, ripped off the what's called the Byzantine fault algorithm that we have in the Ripple consensus protocol. So yeah, and there's probably others out there as well that have another way of dealing with it. I think some of the private blockchains might have a similar thing. I'm not entirely sure, but yeah. So there we go. I think that's, if anybody has any other further questions, then feel free to ask. But I think I've sort of run out of bits to talk about with this. Hopefully that's given people an idea, and hopefully that explanation I gave at the start is a way of sort of visualizing, understanding kind of what's going on in the scenes, and what the role of the validators are in the network, what the role of the rest of the nodes are, how they come to agreement, and how it differs with proof of work systems like Bitcoin. So there we go. If there's no further questions, then I'll wrap it up then. And if anybody does have any other further questions, then feel free to ask in the comments or grab me on Twitter. And yeah, like and subscribe and all that kind of stuff. And thank you very much for listening. Okay, thanks a lot.